Okay, cool. Here we go. The Black Death by me. It was a global pandemic that returned over and over and is still returning today. Symptoms. The symptoms of the plague included fever, swollen lymph nodes, boils, blotchy skin, vomiting blood, and death within 3 to 4 days. How it was named the Black Death. Survivors called it the Great Pestilence, but Victorian scientists renamed it the Black Death. Where did it come from? It came from Central Asia, carried by populations of rodents infested with plague-carrying fleas. Every caravan that brought spices to Europe brought death with it. How it traveled. Plague ships first reached busy ports in France, Spain, then Norway, offloading their deadly cargo at each stop. Mongol hoarders. The Mongols had a huge part in spreading the deadly disease as well. It is known that where the Mongol army went, so went the plague. Positive effects of the Black Plague. The plague targeted frail people, so the general health of the population improved after the epidemic. Second, social structures changed because of the heartbreaking depopulation, creating a lack of workers, making wages rise. 3, the price of food and other products fell. 4, the standard of living increased since there were less people. And finally, people could access higher quality food. Then we have the negative effects of the Black Death. First one is drastic reduction of the amount of land under cultivation due to the deaths of so many laborers. Second is a slump in trade. Third is anti-Semitism created infested throughout Europe as Jews were blamed for the spread of the Black Death, causing entire communities of Jews to be killed. We're not really sure why they were blamed. It was just like a weird rumor that went around, which is really strange. 4, up to 60% of the entire population of Europe was killed during the epidemic. 5, many children were orphaned and lived in the streets when the plague killed their parents. Black Death versus COVID-19. Common misconceptions. Many people believe the Black Death and COVID-19 are similar because they are both pandemics. However, there isn't a set definition for a pandemic. A pandemic is a disease that's prevalent across the world. Coincidentally, both the Black Death and COVID-19 originated in China, which caused people to believe they are similar. Current statistics of COVID-19. As of April 27th, which is when I originally did this, there were 3.04 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the world. 211,000 people have died. 895,000 people have recovered. The latest coronavirus has a fatality of approximately 3%. Statistics for the Black Death. According to the World Health Organization, the Black Death killed more than 50 million people. Infected with the bubonic plague had a 50% fatality rate as well, which is much worse than COVID-19. And currently, the Black Death looks to be extremely worse than COVID-19 overall. Reaction to COVID-19. Due to the coronavirus, we have already shut down schools, restaurants, bars, most sports, any large crowds and events, and people have been advised not to gather in groups larger than 10 people. This has worked so far. But since many establishments have shut down, the economy may be a whole new problem that people didn't have to deal with nearly as much in the 14th century. Reaction to the Black Death. There is not much information on how people reacted to the Black Death. However, here's what we know. They continued trade. Some ports were shut down, but not many. People mostly just panicked, and the main reason the Black Plague killed so many was because there weren't enough measures taken to prevent it from spreading. In conclusion, at this point, the Black Death seems to be much worse than COVID-19 because COVID-19 has a lower death rate and our reaction to it. We're excited, and that's it.
Printing the future. History would never be the same after the printing press was invented. Hello, my name is Ruby Amick. I'm in 9th grade, and today I'm going to be telling you about the printing press from World History Alive. In 1440, the printing press was invented. Johannes Gutenberg was a German goldsmith and inventor. Even though he had been politically exiled from Mainz, Germany, he returned, and by 1450, he had perfected the printing press and was ready to use it commercially. In 1605, the Relation, the first official newspaper, was printed in Salzburg, and newspapers began to appear all across Europe. This formalized the printing press's contribution to the growth of literacy, education, and far-reaching availability to collect and share information for ordinary people. Because of this, combined with the printing press, ideas and advances in many fields, along with the fact that education would not have been as relevant as it became. If we look at our present time and envision what it would have been like if Gutenberg had not invented the printing press, it would be radically different. Without the invention of the printing press, many things in history would have changed. The Bible, for instance, was the first book Gutenberg ever printed. Gutenberg borrowed money from Johannes Fust, who became his partner in 1452. They started out printing amphoria, like pamphlets. They also printed calendars. In that same year, the Bible, the first book, was printed in his shop. It is believed that he printed 180 copies, each 1,300 pages, and around 60 of them were printed on vellum, a fine parchment made from the skin of a calf. Each page of the Gutenberg Bible contains 42 lines of Gothic-typed text, with double columns, and some letters are even in color. Gutenberg used 50,000 sheets of paper and 300 separate molded letter blocks to create the Bible. Many fragments of these books survived, and there are 21 complete versions of the Bible and 4 of the vellum versions. Without the printing press, religion would not have grown. People would not have been able to read the Bible and come to their own conclusions about faith. In 1501, Pope Alexander VI decreed excommunication for anyone who printed documents without the Church's permission, but that did not stop Martin Luther and John Calvin printing their books, and Copernicus printing his book on the revolutions of heavenly spheres. The Pope could just not stop the printing presses. And by 320, humans were reading and writing, but this skill was usually restricted to scholars and priests. Everything had to be handwritten or hand-copied, and because of this, books were very rare. Without literacy, there was no way to have a true education. However, the printing press changed this. Books were more easily distributed and published, which encouraged more to read and write. It also helped supply teachers with easier supplies in the classroom. It also helped alert people of topics using newspapers, pamphlets, and further educating them. In fact, in larger cities of Europe, yearly book fairs were held. The printing press also plays a significant role in science. The printing press was known as the invention of the century and played a vital role in the significant and scientific enlightenment. The printing press could distribute knowledge all across Europe, teaching the masses, changing ideas and how thoughts were shared. Books also helped create easier access to information. Scientists could publish their theories, making their own hypotheses. Also, visual aids became more necessary in the scientific field, leading others in experiments, discoveries, and studies. Science would not be as easy to learn about, and new discoveries would have been halted without the information the printing press spread. Science is as advanced as it is now due to the printing press. The human race is where it is today because of the printing press. Without books, kids would not be able to learn anything, and history as we know it would not have happened. All of the classic books, such as William Shakespeare, Pride and Prejudice, and Little Women, would all not exist. Also, modern books, such as The Hunger Games, Ranger's Apprentice, and movies that have been adapted from books would also not exist, such as The Lord of the Rings and Narnia. Without these, so many people would be robbed of entertainment and joy. Because while books would exist, they would not have risen to the popularity they have today and wouldn't be as available to us, cutting down on the number of jobs that books supply. Authors who write books would be out of jobs, along with editors who would be out of jobs, and people who create the physical book, librarians, companies, bookstores, and others all would not have jobs. Journalism would also not exist without the printing press. Newspapers would not exist, and neither would large paper companies. And education would have been much more difficult. So what would be the major difference? Well, the major difference would be the fact that we wouldn't have any libraries, schools, and universities. We not only as a nation but as a world would be less advanced in technology, intelligence, and education. We would not be as knowledgeable in certain subjects as we are now, and we would have fewer jobs. The ease that we print papers and reports without thinking otherwise would not be possible without this invention. Without the printing press, we would be a much less educated, employed, and imaginative race. Thank you for listening.
Witch Trials by Lucy Key. "80,000 people died in the European witch trials, but we do have recorded evidence of being killed because they were also convicted of being witches. I wouldn't say that's very fair. They couldn't defend themselves. So punishments varied from small fines to hangings. Burning at the stake, only certain areas really burned people at the stake. Most people died from hanging. So women's rights would have happened slower if the witch trials had never happened, because during the witch trials, generally before the witch trials, women were only being accused of things. They could never be in court any other position. So during the witch trials, they could accuse people, and they could be in court as a person that saw everything that happened. So yeah. The church. So the death toll for the European witch trials is a bit weird because Germany has the most that were killed, and tried in the witch trials. And that's because the Protestant Reformation happened in Germany, and a guy named Heinrich Keimer, he wrote a book called The Hammer of Witches, and it was arguing for that witchcraft existed and what to do. And it was the second best-selling book in the Europe other than the Bible. And the Catholic Church wanted more followers, and they told everyone, like, come to us because we know how to take care of witches. And so they were trying to gain more people, because for thousands of years there was just that church. The court system would have been not as fair if the witch trials hadn't have happened, because they during the witch trials they allowed hearsay, and they also had unjust things, like they tortured the people until they'd make false confessions, and the government after came and was like, that you don't do this anymore. So they kind of the court. And
Constantinople, established 330 AD. I present this event changed the world. The West suffers. Diocletian divided Rome in 284 AD because he reached the conclusion that the Roman Empire had grown too big for one man to govern alone. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was conquered by Germanic tribes. This event plunged the world into the Dark Ages. People became uneducated, and living conditions worsened along with it. The Byzantine Empire flourishes. The Byzantine Empire never lost the Roman culture. Byzantine cities enjoyed the beauty of Roman architecture and art. Children could go to school to be taught mathematics and science, and people had ample amounts of food. The Byzantine Empire was flourishing. Revolutionary new cannon, giant walls smashed. After 55 days of siege, the Ottoman Turks smashed through the giant walls of Constantinople. The revolutionary new cannon, named the Bombard, was created and implemented in battle for the first time. These cannons fired massive cannonballs with extreme power that smashed through the giant walls of Constantinople, allowing the Ottoman Turks to pour into the city, easily conquering the Byzantine Empire. Modern artillery weapon, gunpowder age. The first major deployment of a modern artillery weapon was This triggered the start of the gunpowder age, replacing catapults, trebuchets, and ballistas. From this point forward, nations would utilize the artillery as their major offensive weapon. This would increase the amount of casualties in a given war, allowing the nations with the most firepower to dominate. Smuggled books out of the library, scholars flee. The fall of Constantinople proved beneficial to the rest of the world. Surviving scholars smuggled ancient books out of the library and brought them to Italy. The knowledge they contained triggered the Renaissance. Well, without the fall of Constantinople, the scholars never would have brought the ancient books to Italy, and the Renaissance would not have happened. Without the Renaissance, Dark Ages would have continued on for much longer. Constantinople's loss is the world's gain, a spark for humanity. If not for the fall of Constantinople, humanity would likely still be using the feudal system, or maybe life would have been wiped out completely. The New World would not have been discovered, and you would not be listening to this presentation. Instead, you would be in your mud hut or peat house, free of the pigs, wondering if you'll die of starvation or the Black Plague. contributed of the world.
The tank might not exist because it was inspired by the armored car. This would have changed many things like World War I and World War II. The armored car is Leonardo da Vinci's most famous invention. It was inspired by the turtle, which with a curved top and 360-degree movement and shooting. It did have one major flaw, though. To be able to move, it needed a flat surface, and it couldn't move on very bumpy terrains. Its purpose was to intimidate and scatter opposing armies. The modern tank, though, its wheels were made of tracks on them to better traverse rough terrain over barbed wire. Also, instead of having cannons all around to shoot 360 degrees, it has one barrel that can turn 360 degrees. Though the early ones broke down quite frequently, almost half the time. Well, but this machine broke the stalemate of trench warfare on European battlefields, and though it didn't allow them to win decisively because they broke down half the time, they helped quite a bit. The tank has been used on the battlefield ever since, and if it didn't exist, the war could have been a lot longer. Or possibly aircrafts like planes and helicopters would have been developed a lot more. Between World War I and World War II, the tank was greatly improved, but mostly by Germany. Better tanks gave them the advantage over the Allies. Using blitzkrieg tactics and making full use of the speed and armor of the tanks to break through defenses. Without the tank, Germany might not have had this huge advantage at the beginning of the war and not be able to take ground so fast. Also, they could have focused more on aircrafts like planes and helicopters. Bombing could have been more frequent, leading to more deaths, and then there would be more air fighting and more advanced aircrafts today. Overall, it probably wouldn't change the outcomes of the war, but there could possibly be more deaths because of a greater focus on aircrafts, leading to more bombing, and planes today could be more advanced because of more research then.
The Inspiration of Michelangelo, a presentation about Michelangelo and how he inspired the world through his poetry and painting. He considered himself a sculptor rather than a painter. Donatello was inspired by Michelangelo's work. He got ideas from him and even went to see the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The Sistine Chapel is the Vatican City's most popular tourist destination. It took Michelangelo 4 years to finish it. Out of all the pieces he made, this was the most famous. People go to see and admire the chapel ceiling. After completing the Sistine Chapel, he discovered his new raw talent, poetry. Later in Michelangelo's work, he had a talent for poetry. He started to explore such poetic staples as love and the approach of death. He stopped writing love poems after his close friend, Vittoria, died in 1547. Michelangelo is one of the leading lyric poets of the day. He was called the Dante of art, and he used the imagination of his paintings to the written word. Michelangelo made his readers feel what he was writing. He was very originative, and this captivated people's attention. One of my favorite poems by Michelangelo is called I Feel as Lit by Fire. The line from that poem that caught my attention was, "It heats the world and yet itself's not warm." This was a very interesting poetic line. To me, it's saying that fire can heat the world and burn things up, but fire can't burn itself. In conclusion, Michelangelo was very important back then, and without him, some young artists would not be who they are today. He was and is a true Renaissance man. Thank you.
Yea, Christopher Columbus, the brave explorer. Columbus changed the world by introducing the greedy, land-hungry Europeans to America. He was the first person to discover America. He showed that it was possible to sail west from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean. He made 4 trips across the Atlantic Ocean from Spain in 1492, 1493, 1498, and 1502. In 1492, if no one sailed the ocean blue. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan also could have been the first person to discover America if Columbus didn't exist and was the second person who came to America after Columbus. If Columbus didn't exist, his 3 ships, the Nina and the Santa Maria, might have run out of water, threatening the lives of all the sailors. They could have been lost at sea or shipwrecked in a storm because they sailed during hurricane season. Christopher Columbus was not the first person to propose that a person could reach Asia by sailing west from Europe. Probably the most significant contribution of Columbus was the discovery and use of the Atlantic trade winds. Christopher Columbus was not his real name, it was Christopher Colombo. In 1492, Columbus, who was the first European to land on an island of the Bahamas, was very passionate about exploration. Christopher Columbus was very important to history because he is credited with the discovery of the New World because his voyage started the era of European colonialism in the Americas. This was a very important moment in European history. It also led to the Spanish colonization of the Americas. Thank you.
No Starbucks. A presentation about the Columbian Exchange, how it affected our world, and how it would have been different if it had not happened, by Annalise Sanchez. Me. So what was the Columbian Exchange? It was a period of time during the 15th and 16th centuries when the New World and the Old World exchanged their things. They exchanged crops, supplies, and even diseases with each other. That's a little slow. The population had increased, and it disincreased due to the new diseases and food that they had never had. Protein. Protein is one of the most important things to have. Meat, pork, and chicken all came from Europe during the Columbian Exchange. It would be very rare now, and leather products such as jackets and sofas would have gone up in price. A shortage of iron can lead to serious health issues, but with meat, many people have stayed safe. And meat supplies a lot of the most popular businesses today, such as McDonald's. It is very famous for their burgers, with the main ingredient being meat. It is so popular that they sell 75 burgers per second. Yes, per second. And studies show that the average American can eat up to 117 pounds of meat per year, which is a lot. And many have died from diabetes. And sugar did play a big part in it, but meat played an even bigger part in it. The population could have gone down. Dairy. Milk is very important, especially for newborn babies who have mothers that cannot nurse. Formula is almost 70% milk, and without it, they can't survive. Formula could have gone up in price. Milk has a very bad side to it, actually. Studies show that it has heart disease connected to dairy. So dairy played a big part when it comes to heart disease. Coffee. The Europeans gave us coffee beans during the exchange. And Americans drink coffee to help give them energy, although doctors have warned others to stay away from it because it can lead to serious type 2 diabetes. And the average American can drink up to about 48 gallons of coffee per year. Although one of the most famous coffee shops now, one of them being Starbucks, has made a great profit for America. There are 10,958,904 drinks sold per day, and each location makes $3,800 per day. So caffeine can still benefit the states. Possibilities. The Europeans introduced us to slave trading. If the Columbian Exchange had not happened, we might not have had a civil war, considering the whole fact for it was to set the slaves free. So if there were no slaves, there would have been no need to fight. And the Europeans also gave us horses. People traveled by horses before the automobile. If it had not been invented, maybe the automobile would have been invented sooner. But no one knows. The Europeans also gave us not so pleasant things such as diseases, including the flu, yellow fever, whooping cough, and smallpox. A lot of this relates to Native Americans, so the Native American population could have been increased. In closing, so the European ship could have sunk, and the exchange could have failed. Anything could have happened. And if the Americans were stubborn and they didn't want anything to do with any of these new supplies, we would not have had them today. But they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't. We might not be living the same way that we do today, but it was put into place to help us with our supplies and not to help just America, but the entire world. That's all. Thank you.
No tools. Native Americans. Native Americans are very important in history. We see them in Christopher Columbus and Thanksgiving. Even in sports we see them. The Indians built tools, but not just any tools. Tools that America did not have. America had tools, but not their tools. How many times have you seen a military soldier with a bow and arrow? The natives have tools to build better tech. The Columbian Exchange is very important. It brought food, new food that people had not seen before, like milk and much more. Horses were brought. Native Americans had seen horses until the Columbian Exchange. The horse was the inspiration for cars. Henry Ford built Ford, and that's why the Ford Mustang, because a Mustang is a horse. When you see carriages or wagons, what's pulling them? Horses. The tools that Native Americans helped the U.S. make newer and better guns, which helped less wars and less deaths, and also less slaves. Less deaths means presidents like John F. Kennedy could be alive and Abraham Lincoln. The Columbian Exchange brought milk and cattle for hamburgers. Without milk means no ice cream or chocolate, no cake or cookies. In closing, the Native Americans and the Columbian Exchange made a difference in the world. That's it.
Okay. A critical battle in English and Spanish history. The purpose of the Spanish Armada. It had the purpose of sailing from Spain to Flanders, Belgium, to pick up an army commanded by the Duke of Parma in order to invade England. The Spanish wanted to conquer England because Protestant English ships were looting Catholic Spanish ships traveling to the New World. Spanish fleet versus English fleet. The Spanish Armada consisted of 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, and 18,000 soldiers. The larger English fleet consisted of 200 ships, 14,000 sailors, and 1,000 soldiers. Both sides carried 1,500 brass guns and 1,000 iron guns. Sailing to England. The Armada was commanded by the Duke of Medina Sidonia, who was a wealthy aristocrat with no naval experience. The Spanish set sail in May of 1588. First actions. The Armada was first sighted on July 19th, sailing towards England. The English ships, which were docked in Plymouth, let the Spanish fleet pass. On July 21st, the first battle occurred when the English started firing cannons at the Armada from long range. The only losses in this battle were 2 Spanish ships collided. Minor skirmishes. On the 23rd, the English attacked to prevent a Spanish landing near the town of Weymouth. Again, English fired from long range, and the Spanish were not close enough to board. Neither side suffered any losses, and the Armada kept on sailing. By the 25th, the Duke of Medina Sidonia had not heard from the Duke of Parma. Minor skirmishes continued. The Spanish anchored their ships on the Isle of Wight. The English divided into 4 groups and attacked from all sides. The Spanish, who were headed towards the deadly sandbank, retreated and sailed to Calais, France, to wait for the Duke of Parma. The English had successfully prevented the Spanish from landing on English ground. The Battle of Gravelines. During the night of the 28th, the English sent fire ships into the anchored Armada. Although no ships were damaged, the Spanish, who panicked and cut their anchors, sailed out to sea. The Battle of Gravelines continued. The next morning, only the Duke of Medina Sidonia and 4 other ships were still anchored at Calais. The English began to fire at the Armada again. This time, the English fired at closer range, and the Spanish took severe damage. Despite being damaged, Medina Sidonia kept fighting until other Spanish ships returned to help fight. Even with more support, the Armada was no match for the mighty English fleet. After 8 hours of fighting, the English pulled back because of low ammunition. Spanish retreat. Strong winds were pushing the Armada further and further away from their destination and closer to deadly sandbanks, so they decided to return to Spain by sailing up and around England. Dangerous storms and winds made the disastrous journey even worse. Many ships sank or just went missing. The majority of the Armada sank off the rocky coast of Ireland. The remainder returned to Spain, defeated in September 1588. Conclusion. In the end, the English lost no ships and only 100 sailors. The Spanish lost 63 ships and around 15,000 sailors. This was a major victory for the English. This victory allowed England to remain a Protestant country. And that's it.
Okay.
Ooh, fancy.
Okay. In the year 1570, English ship designers began to build a sleeker and faster ship to defend against the Spanish. It was called the race-built Galleon, and it was built under the direction of a man named Sir John Hawkins. You may not have heard of him, but if it were not for him, maritime history would never be the same. Okay. First, let's talk about Sir John Hawkins. He was one of the very first English slave traders. Slave trading to the Caribbean was very profitable in that day, and anyone who did it was promised riches. He went on a total of 7 voyages to the Caribbean to sell slaves. He was second cousin with Sir Francis Drake. In the year 1577, he became Treasurer of the Navy. And in the year 1589, he became Controller of the Navy. Okay. So, disaster. On one of Hawkins' 7 voyages in the Caribbean with his cousin Sir Francis Drake, Hawkins' ship sprung a leak and had to stay back at port. The Spanish attacked, and we don't know exactly why. Only 2 of the English ships made it out, Hawkins and Drake. It was one of the reasons an undeclared war broke out between England and Spain, leading to the Spanish Armada. Alright, so
England needed to figure out a way to defend against the Spanish's powerful galleons. All right. Introducing the race-built galleon versus the Spanish galleon. All right. So the Spanish galleon. It had a lot of issues. First of all, it had extremely tall fore and aft castles, which leads to it being very tall out of the water. So the sides of the boat were almost like other sails, so it didn't have a lot of control over the wind, meaning it was very slow, tubby, and couldn't really move around a lot. Its masts were very centered, and its main one was pulled in the center, making it much slower and less maneuverable. The type of cannon it carried were very slow to reload. All right. Now let's talk about the race-built galleon. First of all, it gets its name raced, not because it is faster, but because the ship designer raised or cut the fore and aft castles, but over time that name changed to raced. It had significant control over the wind. It is lower to the waterline, meaning it is more maneuverable. Some say it was shaped like a fish, and its front mast was slanted slightly forward, making it able to turn quicker. And the type of cannon it carried had a much quicker reload rate. All right, so is there a way to use like a little pointer? I'm not sure.
We can see your mouse. We can see your mouse moving.
Okay, so I have a picture of both. Here's the Spanish galleon, and here's the race-built galleon. So you can first of all see where the water line is on both. You can see the water line on both, and how much lower to the water the race-built galleon is compared to the Spanish galleon. So you can clearly see how the wind would be able to push around the Spanish galleon much more than the race-built galleon. Also, right here, you can see the front mast was very centered, but then you look over at the race-built galleon, it's slightly slanted forward, giving it more control and maneuverability to turn, which was exactly why they were able to hit and run in the Spanish Armada. In conclusion, although the changes made to the boat were small, the changes that would have happened in history would be significantly changed. For instance, England would have been Catholic. Oh, that's a typo. England's population would have been tortured and killed, and England would not have become the world's next superpower.
William Shakespeare, the greatest poet ever. William Shakespeare was a poet, actor, and playwright who lived in the 16th and 17th century. He was born in Avon, Warwickshire, and was the son of John Shakespeare, who was a very successful glove maker from Snitterfield. His mother was Mary Arden, the daughter of an affluent landowning farmer. At the age of 18, William married Anne Hathaway and had 3 children, Susanna and twins Judith and Hamnet. Unfortunately, Hamnet died of unknown causes at the age of 11. Shakespeare had a successful career as an actor and part owner of the theater Chamberlain's Men. Shakespeare's most known works were created between 1589 and 1613. He is known today for his many plays and books such as The Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Juliet, As You Like It, Othello, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Hamlet. Shakespeare's works consist of 39 plays, 154 sonnets, which were poems. His plays, consisting of comedies and tragedies, are some of the finest works in the English language. Shakespeare was considered the soul of the age and was loved by many people because of his plays. Nobody really knows when Shakespeare started writing, but most of his plays are recorded in 1592 in London. He was a celebrity during the Renaissance. Shakespeare invented over 1,700 words we use today in our daily life. These words include accommodate, accessible, upstairs, and downstairs, and hundreds more. Shakespeare's plays are still important today because they illustrate problems in our daily lives, such as illness, falling in love, and war. Queen Elizabeth I very much enjoyed the plays by Shakespeare. Shakespeare's plays are very interesting
and forced the audience to pay attention in order to understand. This is in part because the phrases from the Renaissance are no longer in use today, which sometimes makes them difficult to understand. Shakespeare's performances have been rediscovered and performed by theater troupes and schools and translated into every living language. Some plays are emotional and some plays are hilarious. Shakespeare's plays are sorted into 3 categories: tragedies, histories, and comedies. Tragedies are emotional with sad endings. Histories recount interesting events that happened in the past. Comedies are made to make the audience laugh. During his career, he divided his time between London and Stratford. In 1596, the year before he bought the new place, which would serve as his family home, Shakespeare lived in St. Helens Parish, north of the River Thames. Later, he rented rooms with a French Huguenot, which is a French Protestant, named Christopher Mountjoy, who was a maker of ladies' wigs. Shakespeare signed his will on March 25, 1616, in perfectly good health, but he died within a month on April 23rd, at age 52. Many were very sad when Shakespeare died. He was completely loved by many because of his ability to make people laugh and cry. That's it.
What if the French Revolution never happened? Introduction. Not long after the American Revolution, the French people started to face the same reasons to revolt against their monarchy, just like the American colonists did. Things like economic struggles, the excessively spending monarchy, and unequal rights between the French people just screamed for an upcoming revolution. But what if the French Revolution had never happened? Without the French Revolution, the French monarchy wouldn't have been abolished, religion, school, and family life would have gone way downhill, and the amount of looters, rioters, and stealers would have increased significantly. France would still have a monarchy. Without the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI would not have been executed. Therefore, Napoleon wouldn't have come to power, and Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's same family would still be ruling France today in a monarchy. It wouldn't have laid the foundation for a modern state governed by people. There may have been no World War I, Cold War, nor Russian Revolution without the inspiration of the French Revolution, and the European Union and spread of the French government to other countries would never have happened. The Church and Religion. If the French Revolution never happened, France wouldn't have had the ability to fund the church. If the people don't go to church, they miss their weekly Bible teaching and slowly slip away from the faith. There wouldn't be enough money to pay for the services of the pastor. If there was ever enough money to fund the church, the government would influence exactly what would be preached to the people going to church in the first place. School and learning. The government would not only influence the church, but the school as well. The teachers wouldn't be paid enough money due to the overspending of the monarchy, and most parents wouldn't be able to afford tuition for their children. Teachers would start demanding to be paid, and students would have to drop out, eventually resulting in schools shutting down, with the boys having to learn how to provide for the family and the girls having to learn housework. Family lifestyle. Due to a yearly lower income, the French people would be closer to homeless than they already were. Most of them would be enslaved by the feudal system, peasants and slaves. They'd always have to work for money. Whatever crops were produced, some would be given to their landlord, some for their family, and the rest to spend on clothing and necessities. As far as clothing, home materials, cloths, and fabrics would be used. Families wouldn't be able to participate in holidays or special events, nor would they be able to visit family and relatives in other countries because of not enough money to leave the country in the first place. Looters, rioters, and stealers. Everyone would start to loot, riot, and steal from the higher classes, each other, and even the monarchy. The population would get very greedy and begin to steal from one another to provide for themselves and their families. It would be a very dangerous society to live in at the time. Many would even talk about fleeing to America for freedom and independence, almost anything to rid themselves from the awful society of the falling apart country. In conclusion, the French Revolution was truly an event that changed our world. Without it, France would still have a monarchy, religion, school, and family life would have increasingly worsened, and the number of looters, rioters, and stealers would have progressively gone up. The end.